you. So glad everyone could turn out for this. And most especially, I wanted to welcome and thank our speaker today, Jim Gardner, Senior Director of Intelligence at the Wall Street Journal Barron's Group. He's prepared some really fantastic content for us today. We'll let him go through all of that. If you have questions during, maybe you could use the chat function and send a message to Zach, and he'll try to queue those up for us, and we'll find appropriate times throughout to make sure that we're dialoguing with Jim as he goes through the content. So I don't want to take up a whole lot of time. I do think one of the great things about this is so topical. Everyone's got these same concerns and questions, probably a ton of questions coming at you from clients and partners all over the place. What is changing? How do we react to this? So Jim's prepared some content titled "In Times of Crisis: Best Practices for Marketing in a World with COVID-19." And so I'd like to have Jim step in and share a screen and actually take us through some of the content. And I'm sure we'll all find it pretty compelling stuff, and maybe it'll help answer some of the questions we have either in our own minds or coming at us from clients. Jim?
Sure. Greg, thank you for the introduction. And before I start sharing my screen, I do want to share a couple of personal notes. I mean, I figure all of you can see my living room for the most part right now, so I might as well not avoid getting personal with all of you. The first programming note is the fact that I thank you all for encouraging me to actually punch it up in the dress code today. This is the first collared shirt that I have worn, frankly, in about 5 or 6 weeks. And so I thank all of you for encouraging me to punch it up a little bit. Second note, and this aligns with what Greg has just shared about where he's based, I too live in Oakland. I am a stone's throw away from a fairly active train station. And so one of the challenges for me in my work from home situation is the fact that it may, at some point during the next hour, sound as though a train is coming through this living room behind me. I hope and pray that that doesn't happen. I have the earbuds in to kind of adjust, but just know that it will be short and sweet, but very loud. And with that, I am going to share my screen. All right. So we've got everyone now in view of our gentleman working from home. Okay, perfect.
Yep.
All right, awesome. So before we start walking through the deck, I wanted to just give you kind of the genesis and the background why we put this together. As head of intelligence for our tech, our media, and our finance teams, it started happening on a fairly regular basis where the emails that would come in overnight were bucketed into 2 different ways, right? There would be the emails from our internal constituents, our sales leads, our executives, their marketing partners, asking what they could be doing in this changing, ever-evolving time. What were the insights? What were the data points? What was the intel that was out in the marketplace, right? From us, from our third-party vendors, what was that insight that could help them understand a little bit more of how to practice marketing in an age of COVID-19. The second bucket of emails that were coming in, right, were from the third-party vendors that we use, the Cantars of the world, the Ipsoses, all of the consultancies, right? We have relationships with Deloitte, with McKinsey, and those emails would come in, right, with answers to all of the questions that we were getting from our internal constituents. And so the intent was to marry the two and to focus on the commonly requested questions that came in and address them in one cohesive, consistent, ever-evolving deck. And so that's what I'm intent to share today. Feel free to interject with questions, of course, but with that, we'll proceed and cover off on our agenda. We're going to take a look back, right? In every single quote-unquote downturn, and I think everyone can agree that we are either in or fast approaching the R word, there's been work done, right? Going back to the 1920s. It takes no more than a Google search of advertising in a recession to find work that's been done every single decade from the 1920s forward. And so we'll highlight a few of those examples to give you the overarching sentiment from those academics. We'll talk through some case studies, some brands that have used this as an opportunity to present how they are helping, present how they are positioning their brands in a very difficult time. We'll take a section devoted to brand building, I call it, where we look at the impressions that folks have of brands that are adjusting to this situation and that are appealing to them as consumers or as business leaders with specific messaging around that COVID-19 situation. I'll talk a bit about a shift in news consumption. Of course, we've seen our traffic grow exponentially. And what does that mean for our consumers? We have our own confidence monitor in play. In fact, we just closed the book on our third wave. And so we're anxious to share those findings with all of you. And then as a special treat, I thought for the summary, we would integrate a recent webinar that we hosted with the former chief marketing officer for Fidelity, who actually led that company through the 2008 and 2009 recession. I think those comments that he had as far as his summary goes were very relevant and speaks volumes to what our task is at hand. All right, now to take a look back, the point here that we're going to cover off on the next few boards is the fact that consistently, right, from the point of time that we started doing these studies in the 1920s forward, right, every decade, every study, every academic, with or without a PhD after their name, has seen the effect that marketing in a downturn can only benefit brands, right? It benefits B2B brands, it benefits consumer brands. It drives growth for the company. It makes them in a more solid position shortly after, if not during, that recessionary event or that downturn, right? In this work, on this board that was conducted by McGraw-Hill back in 1980, they found that specific to B2B companies who advertised during that recession in the early 80s experienced nearly 300% growth in revenue just 4 years later, within 4 years. And so it's a really compelling statement, I think, to support that continued presence, that continued share of voice leads to a higher share of market. And this is consistent when we notch it up and bring it back just a couple of decades now, right? This is looking at the 1990 recession, and it was a 2002 study on advertising sales. Similar story here. Companies that sustained or increased their presence during a downturn had experienced sales growth shortly after that recession ended. In this case, it was 25% higher, but still stronger, right? Further, an increase in advertising spending has a positive and statistically significant relationship to an increase in short-term sales. So it's not just after everything has kind of abated, it's during that process. The relationship between advertising expenditures and growth is strongest during recessions and times of economic turmoil, right? It's when people can look to those specific points in time and prove that advertising actually works. All right, so here we've got a mix of different brands, whether it's a consumer brand that focuses on luxury market, like De Beers, or whether it's Amazon, right, or Schwab in financial services and Vanguard. It could be a retail brand like Pizza Hut and Taco Bell. But again, regardless of whether or not it's B2B or B2C, luxury or consumer, it is a situation where brands that double down in opportunities at downturn times generally always benefit from that opportunity, right? De Beers doubled its 2008 Christmas advertising spend. Sales softened, but by the end of that 2009 period, they had sales increases of double digits, about 24% by the back half of 2009. And trends in consumers' desire to buy diamonds, remain consistent. Amazon, to bring it back to the Bay Area a little bit, in the midst of the most recent recession about 10 years ago, they grew profits by investing in new products, new innovations, and marketing, right? So too did Schwab and Vanguard in or in and around the 1975 recession, right? Those two groups offered something new and different. They innovated, and look where they are today, right? As far as noise from competitors is concerned, Pizza Hut and Taco Bell certainly took advantage of the backtrack that McDonald's conducted, right? Back in 1990, they fell back in terms of their advertising. Pizza Hut and Taco Bell took advantage of that opportunity, and they saw double-digit growth in their own sales. So it's a mix of content here, right? It's a mix of brands, but net is brands that lean in heavily can only benefit from a downturn like this. Okay, so this very colorful chart comes from the folks at Brand Z, which is a division of Kantar Millward Brown. And their focus for this particular study is really to look at and evaluate the top most valued companies on an annualized basis. And so this chart just takes a look at, over the long term, from 2006 forward, how the performance against the two typical stock markets that we've shown here, S&P and the MSCI, how the stock performs overall in aggregate against those brands that are deemed most valued, right? And so the top 10 most valued brands are this lighter blue, right? That's a gain of about 317% against where we started out with the Brand Z measurement back in 2006. So the net here is that strong brands are resilient brands. Resilient brands are most memorable. Most memorable brands are those that market, right? Stories of resilience. They market stories of meaningfulness. They market stories of relevance. Okay, and so the point here, and there's a lot going on this chart, I think, to speak to the header, those brands deemed the strongest actually recovered about 9 times faster when you look at the depths of 2008, right? There was no company that wasn't immune to the situation, but when you look at just the point at which the strongest brands fared better, and it was shortly into 2009, where it took well into 2012 for most other companies to kind of come back and recover. So again, having that strength is part and parcel with the marketing support behind it. All right, moving into our next section, we focus on some of the case studies that we're finding across our media properties, across other media properties that really speak to how they're getting involved, how they're addressing the COVID-19 situation. First one is focused on GM, right? All of the major auto manufacturers have risen to the occasion. And in the case of GM, they have responded to this crisis with a plan that was very reminiscent of the plan they introduced shortly after 9/11 to jumpstart sales, right? With low interest or no interest, longer term loans, deferred payments. Hopefully this is going to make an impact for them, right? Ford and Hyundai have announced similar programs, and other manufacturers, I believe, have followed suit as well. Interestingly enough, you have an opportunity when you work from home to catch up with some television that you've missed. And I can tell you from my own personal experience, Las Vegas has been very, very heavy in rotation with their messaging of resilience. I was watching some programs last night, and no fewer than 4 times that I see this spot. And it really makes you think, and it really makes you think well of, the company advertising. Guinness has done something somewhat cheeky, right? They've signed a 9,000-year lease, so they're not going away. And then again, Ford is lending a hand, and it speaks to, again, their 100-year history. So themes of power and resilience and consistency and longevity, these are all consistent across brands that are taking advantage of this opportunity. Now, across our brands, we're seeing many different messaging come in from our marketers who are focused on a COVID-related appeal, right? We've had SAP come in with very, very impactful messaging about trust, right? And them being a trusted partner to their clients, right? Verizon is a similar situation. We're here, we're ready for you. Pharma, in partnership with the biotech innovation, their commitment to beating coronavirus. ServiceNow and HarperCollins all had similar messaging related to what those companies are doing in this time, in this unique point in time. I'll get into why we have reader quotes on some of these in a minute, but just for now, we had some great feedback, right, on both Verizon and Pharma, right? These messages from these readers express notes of relief, right? They want to see this. They want to know what brands are doing to help their clients and their customers. They feel very, very strongly about what this messaging shares. Similar creative from NetScout, right? It's obviously focused on security and security through the prism of working from home. Raytheon is a strong B2B advertiser. And again, it's a theme of togetherness, right? We're only stronger together. Charles Schwab, our financial clients are also rising to the occasion. With so much uncertainty in the markets, it's reassuring for our readers to see messaging like this. And then, of course, we had Cigna and Humana partner to write essentially a mission statement together on how they were helping address the situation. And then digitally, we've seen creative from Houston Methodist. We've seen creative from BCG. They are aligned with our coverage. And we'll talk a little bit more of that coronavirus coverage in a minute as well. And then travel advertisers, right? Trip Actions has advertised how they can help support and provide coverage for their clients. Qatar Airways, right, bringing in travel into the mix. They've addressed the situation. Deloitte, as I mentioned earlier, is a partner of ours for a couple of different pillars that they support, and they were at the ready with their theme of resilience through their custom content. And then WeWork, of course, I guess this has had challenges, right, in this marketplace because of the work from home situation, but they've still, I think, leaned in with the messaging from them of support for all the various players that are helping in this new paradigm. Now, it's interesting to share that we've had many clients come to us and want to actively avoid any kind of mentions about COVID, any kind of alignments with COVID editorial. And the fact is, the results from our own internal work run counter to whatever that kind of negative association is, right? Folks are leaning in, consumers are leaning in, and they want people to actually speak to how brands are addressing the situation. When we look at a third-party study that we've conducted in partnership with a company called RAM stands for Research and Analysis of Media. They are charged with measuring many of our print and digital campaigns. And when we took a look at the COVID-related messaging, those campaigns performed far better, far stronger than our typical full-page print benchmarks. In fact, when you looked at just basic ad recall, it was about a 14% gain over what we see typically for other full pages. Interestingly enough, this concept of positive brand halo effect is even stronger, right? It increases about 27% above what the benchmark was. But I think the real takeaway here is the fact that we're driving 3 times the amount of folks looking for more information, right? Whether it's an SAP or a Verizon or a Pharma, people want to engage with that brand and look for more information after seeing that creative, after seeing that advertising. That 64% is higher than we've ever seen across other types of content areas. And then, of course, there's also this duplicative effect, where it's not just exposure to our readers that our clients are seeing, but it's also the fact that those readers are recommending those brands to others. So that 69% median score is about 64% higher than what we generally see for similar print campaigns running within the confines of WSJ. So it's a really strong story. All right, our next section takes a look at some brand building. And here we get involved into, for the first part, something more along the lines of investor relations. And once we kind of go through this, courtesy of Gardner, we'll talk through what the impressions of our readers are of the brands that are actively marketing in this space currently, right? Again, as per Gardner, talking to investors right now is critical, right? The companies that excel in investor communications have developed 5 key points, right? They've developed a crisis response team early. They made public statements quickly. They maintained consistent messaging across their enterprise. They've closely monitored the impact on operations and their supply chain. And they've given periodic updates to their customers, to their investors, to keep them informed. Right? Investor relations is critical. Now, it finds that, and this aligns with an earlier comment that I made about that adjacency, that about 80% say that their sentiment about a brand that runs adjacent to coronavirus is actually unchanged, right? There's no negative halo effect at all. And this is a great opportunity to actually increase eyeballs because those are where the eyes are going. It's on coronavirus and it's on the market shifts, at least as far as our brands are concerned. In fact, about half of those respondents who were surveyed by the IAS want to see specifically healthcare and pharma advertising running adjacent to coronavirus. They would appreciate seeing that adjacency. According to Mindshare work, consumers actually want brands to step up now, right? Americans want brands to donate. 67% think brands should donate actual supplies, and about half think that brands should actually rise to the occasion and donate money to causes. And there has been, according to Mindshare, a significant gain in those thinking companies and sectors that include health, care, food, and utilities should stand up and offer aid. Auto and luxury brands have lower expectations, as one might imagine, but they've still seen a jump as well. And only about 13% want to see firms create humorous content, right? This speaks volumes to, having the proper tone and, being supportive, being serious, maybe reducing the amount of humor that we have in our creative at this point in time.
So, Jim, if I could jump in for a sec here, just
Sure.
with a question. When you were talking previously about how a lot, have brands advertising through these periods is important, and we saw the benefits on the back end there. I think in today's climate, it seems like counsel we might offer our clients is you don't necessarily have to avoid main news or COVID coverage specifically, but you also want to make sure that you're aligning, they should have relevant new topical messaging to go in those environments, right? So
Correct.
If you're just rolling old ads into this time frame, you may not necessarily see the same benefits. I think some clients, whether or not to advertise is a different, more fundamental question, and we'll probably get to that a little bit later, but let's assume they are looking to advertise, but they're looking for counsel on how to do this. It seems like what we've seen from the studies that you're sharing is make the messaging topical. Obviously, it has to be brand appropriate, and most people strive for levels of authenticity in their messaging these days. But then also, I think placement. And as a media guy, this is a bit more near and dear to my heart, which is where should these things run? And it seems like we don't have to race to avoid coverage, especially if your message is topical. Would you say that's probably the best counsel we could give to our clients right now?
Yes, I would say it's 100% accurate, actually.
Okay. And if they don't, so producing new ads can be really challenging right now. So if the best they can hope for is using existing assets, maybe they can change a voiceover, maybe they can change a few screens or end card, that might put some nuance into where we run those messages. Again, not necessarily avoiding main news, but if they're starting with an ad that's humor-based, that might impact where we want to place those messages.
Correct. I mean,
Okay.
avoidance of humor, especially around related content to the topic that we're discussing, I think should be avoided. I saw a travel campaign, frankly, that astounded me recently, and it wasn't across our brand, but it was a travel client, a travel account that ran a promotion with a coupon, but the folks seeing the ad had to have responded by just June 30th. Now, that to me was so totally off base. It was crazy, and I don't know how that advertiser would have, been able to kind of support that decision. So that's the kind of difference that I see here, right? Brands should be supportive.
Mm-hmm.
Brands should make themselves meaningful, I think, in this point in time, like some of the case studies that we shared. But even if you're running existing creative that doesn't kind of run in misalignment to what the situation is currently, I think that's fine. It's about building that share of voice.
Okay. Sort of one final question in a similar
Sure.
vein. The cases that we've been discussing to this point are largely what we might consider major advertisers, large brands. Smaller brands, I think, have somewhat of a more difficult decision facing them in terms of if they should spend on advertising or not. And I don't know if there's anything in the case histories that you've looked at that highlight how smaller brands can benefit from this. Assuming they can make the decision to move ahead with ad spend. If there's anything specific around smaller brands that would add a little color to these strategies.
Well, it's an interesting question, and it's one that we haven't looked at by company size, but I think it's just intuitive in thinking that smaller brands still have an opportunity to grow, right? If they're marketing.
Mm-hmm.
They don't necessarily need to have the types of budgets that, an SAP might have, but they have a marketing budget, hopefully, that they can use in this situation to differentiate themselves. And they can do that very effectively through a variety of means. Right. And if it's less about, I think, the actual creative, it's more about the share of voice and how present they want to be in the marketplace. Right. Mm-hmm. Do they want to go away completely and go dark, which is against every recommendation that I would make? Or is there some targeted way of presenting themselves in a unique way that I think is key?
Terrific. Okay. Sorry, I don't want to take you off all of the content, so we'll
no,
continue.
That's fine. And I see other questions coming up, and we can address them as they come along. That's okay. Fine. We've got plenty of time. All right. Uh-oh. There we go. Okay. So I recommend folks, unless you're a researcher, never really look at footnotes. But on this particular board, I would urge you all to just notice that we have an ongoing series of consumer confidence monitors that are in play. We fielded 3, as I mentioned at the beginning of the conversation. These are the results from the 3rd one. And so these were just in field this week, right? These launched on the 13th. We closed them yesterday. And so it's highly topical and a current glimpse at what these folks think of brands that are looking to communicate COVID-related messaging, right? We have about 90% of folks indicating that brands should keep the public informed on how they're supporting, protecting employees and customers, and how they are changing their operations in this current unique point in time that we're in, right? They believe that brands are actually responding faster than the government is, which is, I think, a compelling statement here. They also firmly believe that brands should advertise that they are aware of the situation and its impact on its customers. And we have about 3 in 5 folks agree that, and this, I think, is probably one of the most important takeaways here, is that a brand's response to this pandemic will likely impact the likelihood to engage with that brand or use them in the future. 3 in 5, right? That's not a minority. That is a strong majority. And so I think it's really incumbent upon marketers to kind of take these numbers and really think through how to move forward, at least in the short term. All right, this work is from Edelman. This isn't from our own particular study, but it does look at the preferred channels that folks are looking for from communication purposes, from the brands that they deal with. Email is at the top of the list with about 1 and 2, but traditional media, TV, newspapers, radio come in as strong number 2 at about 2 and 5. A brand's website is a distant third at 28%. And then our social media giants, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, round out the bottom 3. 3 and 5 consumers in this same Edelman study agree that in this time of crisis, they're turning more and more to the brands that they trust, right? This concept of trust is only that much more important in times like this. And about 2 and 5 agree that they have recently started using a brand because of the innovative or compassionate way that they responded to this outbreak. And here we have some notable brands who are addressing the crisis, more case studies, but less backed up with the data and more showing how they're deploying their resources to help, right? LVMH is manufacturing gel, right, in large quantities. Anheuser-Busch has stepped up. Tito's. Microsoft just last week announced that their AI for Health platform is going to help support. Ford, and then of course Google in partnership with other brands are doing the 5, right?
So,
right, this next,
sorry.
Go ahead.
I think, well, some of that content you just went through, I think addressed a couple of the points that were brought up in the group chat. But one of our members, Helena Ullman, has a question before we move into the next section, if we could.
Of course.
Hi. So my question was, do we feel like we have an expectation on brands to actually prove that they're helping frontline workers or people directly affected by COVID for them, in order for them to be able to communicate their understanding of the impact at all? Could it fall flat if they don't do that?
I think in an overarching sense, brands should be supportive, whether it's frontline workers or whether it's their consumers, in just sharing how empathetic they are to the situation and how they're helping to move the needle for their own particular core constituents. I think it's broader than just focusing on specific groups.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great, thank you.
You bet. All right, one of the most commonly requested asks that we get is, what's happening to your news consumption, right? What's happening to your traffic? What's happening to your competitors' traffic? And so this next section kind of addresses the shifts that we're seeing, right? In a study conducted recently, we found that virtually all generations are turning to news sites more frequently, right? The blue shaded bars, looking at it by generation, are those percentages that indicated that they're reading the news more often to keep up to date. When you contrast that with the smaller percentages who are checking social media, I think it's a really compelling statement that social media is sort of going down, and then of course news consumption is going up. While about 4 in 10 of those consumers are reading the news more frequently, only about 30% across all of the groups are consuming social media more frequently. Heading into our own brand, right? As you might imagine, we've seen some traffic gains. And that's because our journalism is, of course, it's our own biased approach, but it's first, it's factual, and it's trusted. We were the first Western news media to report on the coronavirus. And with that trust, with that concept of being factual and first, we've really seen some growth with our subscriptions. In the very first week of March, we saw growth that was 2 times the amount that those typical weeks are in terms of subscriptions. And then in each consecutive week in March, we've seen sales records compared to the previous March of 2019. So subscriptions are way up, membership is way up. which is a strong story for us. And this extends to all three of our key pillars, right? WSJ has grown 145%. MarketWatch is up about 2.3 times where it was an average week. And then Barron's, again, similar to MarketWatch, about 2.3 times what a consistent week would be in terms of uniques. Whoa. I just accepted something, and I'm not quite sure I did what I did, but we'll move on. And so on the next board, whoop, there we go. All right, here's where we get a little bit more competitive. And this is the only board where we actually are showing competitive insights, but I'm a competitive guy, we're a competitive organization. The fact is, when we look at our ComScore numbers, and these were just updated yesterday, looking at the current March frame versus the previous March frame, we're up about 120% in our uniques. About 105 million have interacted with us across the month of March. And our page views are up about 150%. Now, the New York Times and Washington Post have seen gains too. In an ironic way, obviously the situation has benefited most news companies, but I think the point of this board is that we've seen higher growth. We're still a smaller brand because of our more stringent paywall. But again, when people think of WSJ and the Barron's Group, they think of this concept of trust. They think of brands that can help support their financial decisions in a very turbulent market. And they look to us for that topical insight. We published across WSJ alone more than 4,400 articles in the last 3 months. And we've written about 2,000 articles in the last 3 months in that same time frame about just this concept of market volatility. Barron's has written more than 2,000 articles across both of these content areas. And then MarketWatch has written close to 1,500 alone in the last 3 months about the impact of COVID. Now, heading into this next section, a few boards to share. As I alluded to a couple times already, we've just started monitoring we've just started monitoring the impressions of our business leaders and our consumers across a wide swath of content areas. Their travel patterns, their business purchases, their mood in terms of their financial outlook on life, in terms of the economy overall. And what we're finding here is that there's some room actually for hope, right? And there's some optimism. We fielded a similar study back in 2008, right, around the last time of the last recession. And so what we're finding here is that when we ask folks about their own personal financial situation, virtually all of them say in the current frame, about 3 in 5 are better off or will be better off than they were today, right? Looking out a year versus today, 3 in 5 say they're going to be better off. So there's a certain level of optimism there that wasn't there, that was far reduced back in December of 2008. So that's good news, right? When you sum up the folks that think they're essentially going to be the same a year from now as where they are now, it's about 83%. So it's a very small minority. Only about 17% currently think that they're going to be worse off a year from now. Some new statements that we asked just this week alone that were added to the company section of this study. We asked folks a number of different statements related to company expansion efforts, right? Are they pursuing cost reduction efforts? Yes. About 3 in 4 say they raise their hand, and that's consistent across both of our total employed folks and our higher level C-suite folks. But they're also indicating that they're able to access cash needed to finance their operations, right? They're also able to conduct or follow through on their long-range plans, right? They're optimistic about their company's financial outlook. 3 in 5 agree with that. Now, while the companies are preparing for a recession, right? That's about 3 in 5 agree among both groups. The fact is they're not delaying or canceling their planned 2020 investments. right? That's a small minority of the respondents that we found agreeing to that statement. I think in an interesting takeaway here, one that bears mentioning, is the fact that CEOs tend to be far more optimistic among other employed folks in expecting a return to BAU, right? The business as usual within 3 months of containing the coronavirus. So I think that of all of these is perhaps the strongest takeaway to come out of this particular board. All right, shifting to B2C a little bit. Here we're looking at a situation where about 3 in 5 readers plan to keep travel expenditures flat in the next 6 months. We only have a situation where 1 in 3 right now are actually planning to decrease their travel expenditures. And so the implication being likely short-term delays to trips rather than outright cancellations, right? It also means pent-up demand once the crisis abates a bit. Then here we have just some interesting takeaways from readers in their own words about what the spread of coronavirus has done to their day-to-day lives, right? Folks are shopping for groceries earlier in the morning. There's a greater focus on maintaining a proper food supply. They're avoiding the weekly church service. Social distancing, of course, was a prominent remark. They're more cautious about being around crowds. And they're, as I just alluded to, pushing travel plans just slightly off the near term. All right, so what I thought I'd do for our summary, instead of repackaging everything that I've kind of shared along, we had the opportunity to host a webinar. Our Chief Revenue Officer, Josh Stinchcomb, hosted a webinar last week with Jim Speros, who was the former exec VP of Communications and former CMO of Fidelity. He was CMO at Fidelity around the time of the 2008 and 2009 recession, and he helped lead and actually grow the company by significant margins in that same time frame. And so these were his closing remarks to all of our attendees. And of course, the recording is available there on the right rail via the hyperlink. His first suggestion was to activate crisis management teams, as cross-functional collaboration is crucial. Speed is of the essence, right? Ask yourselves as marketers, what are my customers' pain points? How can my customer be of service? Think creatively around what brands can offer customers in every aspect of their lives. Reevaluate your messaging to ensure you're not being tone deaf, right? I think the example that he alluded to was this famous AT&T campaign that he actually created or had a hand in, and it was reach out and touch someone, right? That campaign probably wouldn't play today, right? In much the same way as it did way back when in the 1980s, 90s. Take control of everything you can quickly adjust: websites, your call center scripts, your social platforms. Think through what, where, and how your customers' media consumption habits have changed and rebalance accordingly, right? Your marketing efforts. Focus on all key audiences, not just your customers, but your suppliers, your investors, your employees. Consider offering payment plans, fee waivers, different and unique ways of helping your customers in a potentially problematic financial situation. And then ensure you are getting real-time feedback to inform your decision-making. And above all else, what Jim shared with us was absolutely, most importantly, do not go dark. Keep communicating. And with that, I am done.
Wow, thank you. That was terrific. We really appreciate you taking us through that. Do you have a few minutes for some additional questions?
Of course.
I think the thing that you ended on is actually one of the questions that's kind of been in my mind, which is we talked a little bit about large advertisers and marketers, stay the course, be relevant, pay attention to placement. Smaller advertisers, I think, may have a slightly different set of questions. And one of them could be, and I have heard this from one or two of my clients, it was less a matter of will we advertise or not, but more in terms of when is the right time, when is the best time. I think their thinking was, we can't really afford to be on air in a continuous way throughout this, and then forward into a, what's hopefully a relatively soon sort of post-crisis environment. So obviously no one can time exactly when this is going to start to graduate towards life as we knew it before. But is there anything in the data that you've looked at that would suggest there is a better time to start, or is it truly just never stop, just keep it continuous, and then we'll see benefits on the other side?
My recommendation, and it's just intuitive, it's based upon the research that we've found through the whole advertising in a recession kind of paradigm, is that an always-on approach is key. And there are ways, I think, if you're a smaller brand, to be more efficient, to be scrappier with your marketing dollars. But I think it's incumbent upon brands to not go dark.
Thank you. Are there other questions from the gallery? Hopefully we got to questions that everyone's asked thus far.
Hey, Greg, it's Mike. I just raised my hand. Is it okay if I jump in?
Of course.
First off, Jim, thank you very kindly. That was fascinating, and a lot of things that you think you knew, but some really good specific examples. I always like the case studies. I just wanted to repeat something that John said at the very beginning, that this isn't the new normal. This is really becoming the normal. In my opinion, and a lot of things I've read, the shelter-in-place ordinances, that's not going away. We could see another bloom of COVID, for instance, in the fall and the winter, and obviously there's going to be other SARS and Ebolas and et cetera down the road. We've talked about the increase in news growth, social media, gaming, esports, OTT, streaming. What are some specific strategies? I'd love to hear from the group, and maybe Greg, you can field this one, that you're recommending to your clients, other than just saying, well, let's shift more dollars towards digital. What are some specific things you're thinking are going to be long-term strategies to understand that this is going to be an ongoing issue?
It's a great question. I can give you a brief answer, but I'd love to see if Jim has any insight to share on this as well. Right now, I'd say a lot of our work is still very short term. So it's still, do we need to pull this down? Do we need to wait, regenerate some new advertising that's a bit more relevant to the environment we're in, and then restart that? We do have some clients that are shifting down funnel, shifting to more digital, focus more on DR and less about brand. And I think probably realistically within the next couple of weeks is when those longer term discussions are going to start to happen. So we've gotten, not all of the knee-jerk reactions have actually finished. I actually just had a client yesterday tell me, okay, well, we've got to hit pause on everything. And they were trying to just sort of muscle through and not stop anything. And some of the business realities on the back end of their business model started to catch up, and they said, okay, so I think we're still in a bit of a reactionary phase. So I think the longer term thinking has yet to be really front and center for a lot of our clients in those discussions, and the rest of the group may have very different experiences here. But I think what we're going to be talking about in terms of the go forward is how do we budget for the balance of 2020? What sort of contingencies do we have as people start to move out of shelter-in-place environments? That's going to be a relatively gradual process. And are there certain graduated steps within our own marketing plans that we want to sort of match to those different life patterns? So I think the budgeting and timelines, like how do we map this out through Q3, and then Q4 is going to be just sort of a microcosm in strategy because it's so critical for a lot of marketers. And people are going to start prognosticating about what does e-commerce sales, what does retail sales look like in the Q4 holiday season, and how do we react to that? So I think those longer term strategies have yet to be really sort of laid out. So I don't have such a straightforward answer, unfortunately. I don't know, Jim, did you have anything in your studies that would suggest there's a path forward that we should recommend?
I think the one interesting study that I found that we didn't highlight actually as one of the examples in the recession section was this 1990 work that was done that concluded that it was probably a 50-50 split between short-term, as you mentioned, DR-related turnkey initiatives with a longer-term branding that ran concurrent with that. And so that was what their recommendation was based upon the findings of their white paper.
Great.
I have a question on travel. I'm curious, Jim, do you think, when you talked about your slide on travel earlier, do you think people are going to get on a plane, or are they going to get on a car and do more short-term travel? It seems anecdotally people are going to be, just curious, you alluded to travel, are they going to fly, are they going to drive around, visit more shorter, quicker places?
I think travel is one of those things that can change overnight. I still think there's a lot of optimism that people this summer are going to be out and traveling. I, for one, am traveling July 4th weekend, and nothing's going to change that. And I am ready and willing to accept whatever potential challenges are presented in that way. But I do think in the short term, people will probably travel by car more. I think it's a challenge when, so many things are closed. And so how are these car drivers that are traveling either in-state or locally or even regionally, where are they going? If hotels are closed, if resorts are shut down, like everything I think at once has to kind of open up. And it's not just a matter of, auto versus air.
And how do you, my other question is the politics, and you alluded to it. How do you think this whole normal is going to play in a political environment, not only for president, but for everything else? Have y'all done any kind of insights on that?
I think the interesting thing is, and yes, we have, in this particular confidence monitor, we've asked folks to indicate their level of trust in various institutions. Of course, WSJ being one of them. The presidency was involved in the mix. Congress was involved in the mix. And it's a mixed bag in terms of that level of trust. So it's...
It can be nice. You can tell us those numbers.
Well, let's just say that we're still closing the book on that question. But, when we're looking at hospitals, obviously, and doctors and military officers, police, trust is very high. When you get into the political realm, trust, of course, drops precipitously. So it's going to be a challenge, I think, not only in terms of the back and forth in just what they say, but also the process of voting and how do you get people from their homes. This is going to be the most interesting, I think, period of time in our history, frankly, is this lead up to this election. And I think for a lot of media brands, it can only benefit them, obviously.
Well, we're 4 minutes. Greg, Jim, thank you. Thank you, Wall Street Journal. We try to keep this to 60 minutes. I can tell you that was really, really enjoyable. I mean, there's lots of stuff on there to think about. That slide, I think Mike Linton addressed that normal slide I agree with you, was just a lot of takeaways. Thank you all. We've had such demand for this service that we're going to next week add one that we're personally pretty excited about, and that's talking about, the jobs and how do you think about your resume and where do you go look and how do you network in an interesting environment. And we come back at the end of the month with one on podcasting, what's going on in the podcasting world. We're very pumped about this. So these are going well. Again, a special shout out to all of our friends at Wall Street Journal. And Jim, thank you so much. Greg, thank you. And to all of you I think it's Thursday. I think it's 1 o'clock, whatever day it is. Please be safe.